Sergeant Meghan Lehman from the Troy Police Department. Sergeant, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
So how are you? How are your fellow officers doing?
We're doing well. We're not going to deny there's a lot going on coming out of COVID-19 and then unrest across the nation. So it's a difficult time for us, but we are adapting and looking at what we got to do to go forward.
And with that, it has been really difficult for first responders, police, firefighters, EMS, and so on. All throughout this COVID-19 pandemic, it's been a long several months, and there's been a lot of tragedy involved. How are our local first responders holding up and coping with the stress, with the anxiety, and with just the fatigue, maybe even, from all of that happening so quickly and so severely?
So what we did here in Troy was we adjusted our schedules pretty early on to minimize contact between different groups of officers to limit spread if it was going to happen. And we've been extraordinarily lucky and healthy here. So we've done well as far as COVID-19 has gone. But, it's been a different time because, crime went down, but we're responding to different types of calls. So it's been unique, and then it's been transforming a lot lately as well as people get back to going to work, going out to restaurants. So it's changing every day.
You mentioned that crime is down, but you're getting called onto different kinds of calls, as you said. Elaborate on that. What kind of things are you seeing pop up more now that we're in the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of that, so to speak, in some ways than others, that's different from quote-unquote normal times?
Well, so Troy is a major thoroughfare. It's a major location where people work. Our daytime population, I believe, is up near 150,000 normally. So we were seeing, and we continue to see, a lot less daytime traffic. Traffic is a big issue for us. So that'll be traffic crashes, unsafe driving, and everything else that goes with it. So those things are down. We typically would have a lot of property crimes in Troy, retail related, and those have went down significantly. But people are staying home. So we didn't really see a huge uptick, but a little bit more of dealing with problems at home, family troubles, and that type of thing.
Moving on, last time you were on with us, we were talking about the protests that occurred in Troy just shortly after they had happened. Very peaceful protests, very communicative protests, and really a productive night for Troy and for the community. Many departments are now increasing their commitment to focus on training, retraining, de-escalation, and so on. What has the Troy Police Department's response been to the lessons learned, the communications with the community over the course of this month in terms of any changes or reemphasis of priorities for the future in terms of training?
So we are certainly open, and we are looking at everything we do from every part of the police department. But I think it's important for people to know that we in Troy and most of these police departments around here, we already have these policies that in place. In Troy, we have over 130 policies, and most of the things that people want, we already have them in place. And I think that most of the police departments around here do. Like the president and, a lot of people have come out against chokeholds. Well, we've had that policy in place for, it predates me. So I'm sure it's been years and years and years, but there's a lot of things like that we're already doing. Can we do things better? Certainly we're open to looking at it. We are looking at it, and we want to strengthen our relationship with the community.
There's been a lot of talk too in the media, which you take that as you will, and between residents and people involved in the protests as well, activists, about involving other community assets in the idea of community policing, social work, mental health workers, and so on. From your experience in community policing, with Troy's emphasis on de-escalation and implicit bias training, much like a lot of our other local suburban police departments here in Oakland County, adding those other resources in, such as mental health professionals, social workers, and so on, do you see that as feasible in the heat of the moment in some of these cases, while still being able to maintain the public safety?
Sure. So it depends on the nature of the case. We did look at our data, and last year we responded to over 300 mental health calls, and those are just mental health calls. And a lot of those, we are called to them by other professionals. So the situation's already escalated. You know, social workers, from whether they work for a state agency or a private agency, they will frequently call us to go to a home with them for safety concerns. So we know that's out there, that there's a lot of situations where these professionals they understand the safety concerns are beyond the scope that they're willing or able to deal with. We do work with some agencies already, which again, I'm sure every other police department in Oakland County may have these relationships too, like Haven. We are mandated to refer any domestic violence offense we've had in Troy. We refer the victim to a victim advocate from Haven. Been doing that for years. It works out fantastic. It's a great way to complement the law enforcement service with some social work and some support that way for the victim. We have some other entities in place that we support financially. So Troy Youth Assistance, the Troy Community Coalition, the Avondale Youth Assistance. We've been providing funding and support for those agencies for years. And it works well. If that gets expanded and there's new services, we think that's great. But we also think it's important that people understand kind of what we're looking at. So a lot of these mental health runs, calls we're involved in, they're dangerous. We're not, you know, they can become dangerous. And we also looked up the stats on how often are we called to hospitals and doctors' offices, and that was also over 300 calls last year. So we are looking at situations where, you know, other professionals are calling us for help.
And a lot of the issues that are coming up with the police department stem from moments where split-second decisions are being made. And in some police departments, they're unlike Troy, and they're unlike other police departments that we've talked to lately in the local area, who have put that emphasis on de-escalation and have put that emphasis on implicit bias and other forms of training that I haven't mentioned so far that are vitally important in those situations to prevent tragedies from happening. But at the same time, and we talked about this a little bit earlier on in the week with West Bloomfield's Deputy Police Chief Kurt Lawson after the shooting incident that occurred early in the morning on Tuesday in West Bloomfield. In that moment, there's a lot of tough decisions that have to be made in a split second. Can you take us through a little bit of the perspective from a police officer in those kinds of moments of what's going through your head, what you have to be balancing as you're making those decisions, while also making those decisions in a very rapid situation that requires the decision to be right for the public safety?
Right. So I think it's starting to come to light how complex of a job this can be when you're faced with violence happening right in front of you. You need to protect citizens. You need to protect yourself. There's a lot of different decisions that have to be made in a split second. And we're fortunate to have a lot of training, but those, you know, it's a difficult job.
Sargent Meghan Lehman with us from the Troy Police Department on the Oakland County Megacast, joining us today alongside our partners throughout the community on different community outlets and on the Facebook Live of Oakland University as well. Sargent Lehman, President Trump signed an executive order on the note of training, signed an executive order earlier on this week in regards to police reform. It establishes, among other points that I'm not going to be making in the short list, establishes a database of officers with excessive force complaints on the record, gives departments financial incentive to develop better practices like co-responder training, social work, working with social workers, mental health experts, etc., bans chokeholds, except, quote, if the officer's life is at risk. Your thoughts on this reform, or at least the above points, and are these effective changes that will help or hinder police departments like Troy and in other places as well?
Yeah, so we've looked at all these points, and there's also something 8 can't wait. If you heard of that, it's different policy changes that a lot of groups are pushing for police agencies to adopt this specific language from this 8 can't wait. And we've looked at them, and we have the vast majority of them already in place. So we don't think that for Troy, this is really going to change the way we operate. Do we need to look at what we're doing? Yes, absolutely. Make sure we're following and enforcing our own policies, absolutely. But you know, by and large, we're in a good spot. And most of the departments I'm familiar with around the area are also, they already have those policies in place. It's a matter of making sure our officers know them, are following them, and we're just doing the best we can, being community oriented.
And provides a good example too for other departments throughout the state, throughout the country as well, to look at these departments that have these policies in place and see that they do work, and maybe communicate with them to put those policies in place where they're not in place, or in order to make for better community policing in other areas as well.
Right. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for other communities, especially outside of Metro Detroit, but we are fortunate that we've had support from our community and we've enjoyed support from our elected officials. That translates into money to have this training, which is critical. I don't know how a department that's strapped for resources, are they able to take the officers out of service and put them into fair and impartial police training? Are they able to make these commitments? It's a lot for some departments, I'm sure, to do a big project to undertake. But it's going to be, I'm sure, an uphill battle at some points.
Beginning of the month, protests throughout the country, protests even in suburban areas of Metro Detroit like Troy. One day of protests, cooperation, communication is great, but that's one day, and that doesn't solve the issue or doesn't continue that helpful conversation. Has there been any plans, or has there been action put in place to continue that dialogue with the organizers of the movement and the protest in Troy, and with other members of the community to continue to make forward progress on these issues?
Sure. So we have a community services unit. That is the unit that I supervise, and we've had it for 30, 40 years. So we're fortunate that we already had a mechanism in place to get out there. We already know a lot of our community leaders. We're meeting with them regularly. So specifically what we did in this situation is we started getting our data, getting our policies together, getting what people want to know, and putting it out there on our social media. So we've been doing that for a couple of weeks, just putting, how many use of force did we have last year? People want to know this kind of information. So they know what we're actually dealing with here. We put that out there. We also have a community forum planned in a few weeks. And we're just going to see what, we're willing to meet with anyone. We're willing to have more of these community forums if people want to come. So yes, we're doing a lot of stuff already, and we're willing to do more depending on what people want to participate in.
Everybody's got to learn, and everybody's got to communicate in order for us to be able to make a better world. And it's good to hear that that is in the plans for Troy and hopefully for a lot of other departments in our local area. Sergeant Lehman, before I let you go, anything else you'd like to say today?
No, thank you for having me on, and thank you for talking about this important subject.
Always a pleasure. Thank you very much. Sargent Meghan Lehman from the Troy Police Department with us on the Oakland County MegaCast.